Washington's seen some big-time performances 1 week into fall camp.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now, Lars, we've got a whole lot we're going to get to today. We got a really great question that we're going to dive into about our biggest. We're picking one each, one breakout star on offense and defense. We didn't set any criteria for this one, so we're getting into that. And we got more on Washington's latest commit, 3-star offensive lineman Zac Stascausky, what that means for the 2025 class. So much more involved there. But before we get there, we have to talk about our biggest takeaways, because Washington is heading into its first year in the Big Ten, and we are officially through one full week of fall camp. We got games coming up starting on August 31st against Weber State. We're all building for that date. We can't wait to get there. But Lars, what is your biggest takeaway from Washington's fall practices through 1 week?
Oof. Well, I'm going to take the quintessential offensive line. I'm going to talk about guard Memillard, because I think it's a guy that now we knew he was likely to come back and be good, but he hasn't really shown any level of rust in terms of what I thought he would, have to work kind of slowly back in that first week. He's jumped right in and looked. When we talk about Cam Davis opening up those runs on the left-hand side, a lot of it starts with E.T. Lee and guard Memillard, and really more so guard Memillard. No disrespect to D'Angelo in that, but when you start to look at how those runs are coming about, guard is really moving people. And so to get right back into the thick of things, basically pick up where he left off in fall camp, when we talk about the offensive line and all the things that go with it, obviously he's more than just a guard, but when you start to look at what that position usually entails, especially the importance between the center and left tackle, having guard come just right back in and not miss a beat, I think to me has been one of the unsung things of fall camp.
I like that a lot, because that was somebody that we were really high on throughout the summer. When we talked about him in the spring, when there were so many more offensive line issues with so few healthy bodies, that it was wait till guard gets back. And that's going to be such a major piece. And I agree. He's been really, really nice. My biggest takeaway, it's a shocker that I'm going this route again. I am just in love with the Steve Belichick scheme, man. I am just in love with everything we've seen from it. We see so much deception. We see so many things every single day that are different from the previous day, where we're seeing no down linemen. We're seeing 6 guys on the line of scrimmage. We're seeing 6 guys in the secondary. We're seeing so many different things that just the more you look at it, the more you say, yeah, this defense is going to be elite. Because when we put out that show the other day, as the Everydayers know, we had high praise for the scheme. We got a lot of questions from opposing fans saying, oh, how can you know that 4 or 5 days into fall camp? The players are going to be awesome. When we think about, Sebastian Valdez, who's been really impressive, I'm going to get to him as well. We think about Carson Bruener at linebacker. We think about Cam Fabic-Ylan and Justin Harrington, Cam Broussard at safety. There are Ephesians Prysock at corner. There are a lot of really, really talented pieces individually, but when you put them all together, and then you factor in what this scheme is going to be and how hard it's made life on Will Rogers and Damon Williams so far in fall camp, you just think, yeah, when other teams get to see this, they're not going to have a good time with it.
And especially when you think about what Washington's defense looked like last season, where you knew Braylon Trice, you knew Eddie, you knew a couple of the guys, but otherwise it was like, what is Washington's hallmark under Chuck Morrell? And it was like a decent secondary things, play to prevent defense and stuff like that. But there's just so many different layers to this defense. It's always funny to hear Steve Belichick, to your point, talk about, oh, we're just running the Washington defense. It's like, bro, this ain't even the Washington defense from 5 years ago. This ain't even the Washington defense from 3 years ago. It's like, this is the conglomeration of Washington defenses, which is his point. And I think why it's so intriguing, because there's so many different, and it's a perfect matchup nightmare for teams in the Big Ten, if you think about it, because you can line up against Iowa and have a heavy front. You can line up against Ohio State. Obviously, they don't play this year, and have a little more spread out with a couple of nickels and a couple, 6 defensive back setups. And it perfectly plays week to week, to where, okay, if we need to travel to Rutgers 1 week and we got to come back from Northwestern, and we got to go down to Oregon, all of these, you're lining up different guys on the roster on defense to do different things. but it's not necessarily, okay, we're going to have this guy play just 7 games because these are the 7 teams he lines up against. No, he can still do a couple of things against the other 5 teams. And that's where you make some of these guys work, like a Cam Brassard, where he's not just a strong safety or a free safety. He can come down in the box. Same thing with Justin Harrington. He can play the nickel and safety. Yep. Apparently Elijah Jackson can do both. It's there's a lot of new things we're learning. And so when somebody asked you, how do you guys know that? It's what we're seeing. To be fair, it's also what we're seeing. It's like we're not just seeing one defense, similar to, and a little bit similar to the offense, where we're not just seeing one straight up. You can see where Jedd wants to get the ball in space in different ways and things like that. But defensively, that's why defense is usually ahead in fall camp early on, because you're the one coming and bringing all the challenges to the offense, and they have to find the answers to correct it.
I just thought of just a perfect comparison in a very different way. It was like when we watched Rome Odunze last spring, and we just said, yeah, that dude's going to be an All-American this fall. It's that clear and present because of what you're watching, because of all the different things that the scheme does, which is a lot of fun. And one more guy that I want to mention on that note is Sebastian Valdez, where he just, whenever he's on the field, he has given the offensive line so many problems. And, we talked about some of the questions that are still outstanding on the offensive line earlier this week, as Dave Verdeers know. But on top of that, that doesn't matter when Sebastian Valdez is on the field. Whenever he's out there, he is just wrecking. It doesn't matter who he's lined up against, what the call is, what's going on. He is finding a way to get pressure in the backfield. And he's not Vita Vea. He's not Elijah Qualls. He's not Greg Gaines. He's not those guys. But when he's out there, he's the closest thing we've seen on the interior so far through fall camp since those guys were in purple and gold.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would liken him. I guess if we're going to pick of that trio, I'd say he's Greg Gaines, but a little bit bigger and a little bit better in pass rush. I think
that's why I like to. I think Elijah is where I'd go there, because Elijah was a fun pass rusher to watch.
He was, although Sebastian's way bigger. Like when you just look at those two lined up next to each other, like I could see the pass rush of Elijah and the body of Greg Gaines mirrored together. Because again, no way can we we both love Vita, and Vita was one of one. Vita is one of one. Like that's all of our guys. And so, but it's the point being that. But either way, even if you have a combination of Elijah Qualls and Greg Gaines is a guy playing in the NFL right now. Elijah Qualls, had made it in the NFL, and I think when you're starting to look at the body types, that's what they're going for. And when you talk about Sebastian coming from Montana State, who already showed that pass rush, and the only question that was going to be there was how quickly can he get up? How quickly can he level up? And I think he arrived leveled up. It didn't seem like there was an issue that, can he handle Big Ten blocking? Well, he working Enoch, like it's no disrespect to Enoch, but it's like they're working guard just as much, and D'Angelo, it doesn't really matter who you put in front of him. And I think that's the important thing when you look at, especially having Jacob Bandis and Voight Chinupi next to him. All three of those guys can do the same thing, but also do a little bit differently. And I think that's why when we're starting to see them line up, because obviously Voight and Sebastian, they're not the same guy, but they can kind of each do a little bit similar things. And when you line all three of them up at the same time, it's an impressive line to look at.
Lars, you got 30 seconds. What's your final takeaway?
Jordan Shaw. I mean, God, like if there's a safe bet in the secondary not named Ephesians Prysock, and I would even throw, maybe Cam Brassard in that realm, I would put Jordan Shaw above Cam Brassard as a safe bet to make plays. Now, that's not to say that. No, I put Jordan Shaw above Cam Brassard. That's what I was trying to say there.
Okay.
Where if you think about it, especially in that nickel position and the fact that he's showing the ability to play outside, he's just a natural ball hawk. And I think he's almost a guy that just seems to run into interceptions. And it's because he's so good, and able to read plays pretty well. And, even though he had 4 games in Indiana, I think he's really almost like a full season in, even though he just got those 4 games. And so he would be another guy where, whether you have Dyson and him out there at the same time, whether you put him at the second cornerback opposite Prysock, whatever you want to do with him, I just think it's going to be hard to keep him out the field.
I like that a lot. Lars, let's jump back over to the recruiting side, because Washington got a new commit on Tuesday. which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. With killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets, which has been great for me. I've used Game Time in a couple different MLB parks now this season. I did it at T-Mobile Park, I did it at Fenway Park, and it's just fantastic to use. I love it because some of the great things about Game Time are the last minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. They got zone deals. You can save even more when you choose the section like Game Time choose the seats. I love their seat views because you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, which is really cool for me because I was checking those out when we were back in Boston at Fenway Park. Used it to get seats about 6 rows up right down the right field line. Oh, it was so awesome. I love the experience, and I love being able to buy tickets on Game Time because you can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Lars, we dropped a bonus show on Tuesday night talking about Zac Stascausky, but we can only fit so much into some of those shows. We wanted to make sure we got a little bit more time in on him. So now that we've recovered, we watched the tape because we watched it at the time. Now we watch it again. What are some of your biggest takeaways when you look at Zac's film?
I think the immediate thing that jumps off the tape is how athletic he is. And I think when you talk about what a Big Ten offensive tackle, especially a left tackle, has to look like, you want a guy who can move, but also, as we talked about on the show, just to expand on it, adding weight to that frame while still being athletic. I don't think he's a guy at risk of losing that athleticism as he gains the weight. And when you think about, what Sawana Fasolo looks like at his size, and you look at what just Justin Hilcom at his size, you can see, okay, there's a range of body types that Brennan Carroll is willing to work with at left tackle or at the tackle position in general. And then you look at the guys that are in the rest of the class. I think it's a perfect marriage between what Brennan wants, because he's listed at 6'6", 275. My money is probably going to play around 285 this fall. When you get to Washington, he's probably going to be up to, you would hope, probably 295, 310, 295, 300, sure, somewhere in that range. But it's when you look at the offensive line, there's so many answers potentially at tackle. You can take a projectable body knowing, okay, if he doesn't end up making an impact for 2 seasons, as I wrote on Athlon Sports, Washington doesn't play Minnesota until 2026 at Husky Stadium. I don't think he's really going to be a factor much until then, but that's why you have those guys continuously coming in the program, because as we saw with the transfer portal, I know we had that discussion on the live show last night, that's why you don't want to go into the portal. It's why you want to build through the high school ranks. And if you can do that with a guy who, also worth noting, was vaulted up from number 5 to number 4 in 247's Oregon rankings. So again, not a guy that's moving down the rankings, he's a guy that's moving up in the rankings. Yeah. And I think that's a good sign if you're Washington, where was it a late identifier? Maybe, maybe not. But that I would imagine Brennan probably had his eye on him. But I think it more or less speaks to Washington's cachet going into the Big Ten, where, hey, you can commit to another Big Ten school. We're not worried. We're not 2-0 against Michigan or Minnesota on the recruiting trail, not Michigan.
Yeah, and I really like everything you're saying there. One thing that I want to add on, because mentioning him rising up in the rankings is really critical, and it's nice to see that. He's number 4 on the 247 sports side of things. And he's also number 2, on their composite side, where Washington is now taking the top 3 players in the state of Oregon in the 2025 class, which is really nice when you just think about the Pacific Northwest. You want to make sure that you can get some guys, out of that region as well. You think Elijah Molden obviously is the first one that comes to mind. And having the top 3 players committed from the 247 sports composite is really cool to see. In Baron Naone, in Zac Stascausky, and defensive tackle Dominic McComb. Having all 3 of those guys in the class is really awesome. You really love that. But I want to jump back into his film, because you mentioned the athleticism, which is really great. But one thing that I feel is somewhat rare to see from, a lot of guys his size and from high school offensive linemen sometimes is the balance and coordination that he shows, where that's really, really key. And it's something that our guy Ben Glassmeyer loves to talk about a lot, is climbing the pass rush arc. I feel he does that really, really well. And just the way that he moves is really fun to see, because you look at it and you just think, yeah, that guy's, as you said, not going to make an impact in 2025, but 2026, 2027, as you start to get down the line, he's somebody who looks like he could be a crucial tackle, whether you like him on the left side or you like him on the right side. That size, that frame, that athleticism is exactly what you want to see. And as we've discussed, is something that you have some other super athletic guys in this offensive line class. Lowen Coleman-Brusa is the first name that comes into my mind because I just love the way he moves his feet, and I love some of the things about him on that front. And I feel we see a lot of those same things with Staskowski. And going down the line, as you start to think about what the 2026 offensive line might look like, which is something these coaches have to constantly be thinking about. This is somebody who, the more you look at it, the more you think, yeah, he might be factored into that mix.
Exactly. And when you also think just about the tradition of Washington going into the state of Oregon for both offensive linemen and tight ends. When you look at Charlie Kroll came in last year. So Baron Norton, going back to back there. Jared Hilbers and Jackson Kirkland, two other offensive linemen. Again, a little bit different than Staskowski, I think, if we're being honest in terms of comparisons with players, but it's still an area that Washington's been able to do well with and get significant contributors out of. You're not just talking about taking a body for taking a body. Whereas, when you look back at what was, I think, the 2020 class where they took Sam Peacock towards the end, this is a little bit different in that regard, because when you start to look at some of those bodies under Scott Huff, it was a little bit different type of projection where you're basically kind of, let's get some depth or insurance there. This one is a body that you're really wanting to take and develop and knowing, and not that they didn't want to develop Peacock, but this one just seems like you could see where the development track is going to be. And Peacock, when you could play right tackle, play left tackle, it was a safe take to take, but this one seems like one where I could see in 24 months, but after, once he signs and things like that. Because again, it's also worth noting, given that he did flip, you want to make sure you can hold on to some of these guys. And not that I'm saying they won't, but it's just, again, as we're speaking about this, the projection for the staff is that in 24 months, you're thinking, okay, this could be like a Sawane Fastola, where if he's not winning the job, he's competing for it in that rotation, getting some potential game time, and just constantly improving. And I think that's how you win those jobs out. But it doesn't preclude them from circling back to a guy like we mentioned on last night's show, Douglas Uchu, or going into the 26 class and saying, hey, you know what? We didn't get the guy we wanted in 25, so now we're going to come in 26 and say, hey, let's see what we can do here and bring him in as a true freshman to compete with the rest of this class in 26. So there's so many different ways you can do it, but it doesn't prevent one or the other. It's a good take to give you the body that you need, but it doesn't preclude a future take down the line, which is exactly what Brennan Carroll needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just all about stacking bodies and stacking that talent, where, when we talked to Brennan Carroll the other day, one of the first things he mentioned is, yeah, it's really nice to have, 15 scholarship bodies, 17 offensive linemen out here practicing, because it was just such a, and of course they were in a really unique situation in terms of all the guys transferring, with the coaching staff leaving so late and all that sort of stuff. So you can't fault the coaching staff for the way the roster looked in the spring. Now, if all of a sudden it's the same coaching staff and there are 8 offensive linemen out there next spring, then there's going to be a whole different question, but it's not going to come to that. And a big reason why is because we've seen Brennan Carroll aggressively attacking the offensive line. We've seen them aggressively attacking the defensive line as well, where you want to make sure in the Big Ten that you're building through the trenches. And this is the perfect take to do that, where you look at him and you just say, yeah, we have a vision for you. We have a plan for you. We know exactly where we want you to be, as you said, Lars, in 18 months, 24 months, 36 months. And that's all you can ask for. And I want to kind of come back to this 26 offensive line thing, where all of a sudden I can see him at right tackle, because I can see a guy like Lowen Coleman-Bruce at right guard. Lane Hatchett wants to stay for his senior season. All of a sudden we're looking at that. And I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but that's the whole point of recruiting. And Champ Talele at left guard, and you've got Justin Hilcom at left tackle. All of a sudden, you're really happy. That's a really nice offensive line. That's without mentioning Paki Finau, where Paki Finau could certainly take one of those guard spots. And it's without mentioning Michael Watkins, who Michael Watkins has been really nice to watch through fall camp as well. And he was somebody who was here in the spring and impressed in the spring. And there are certainly so many different ways that you could just say, yeah, this offensive line can work out like this or can work out like that, where especially because I don't want to make it sound like, oh, I don't think Paki will start, where he certainly could be. But I'm looking at it and just saying, if this guy beats out that guy, there's so many different ways it could work. And that's what this coaching staff is all about. It's about stacking talent and promoting competition, and that the best players will play.
Yeah, and you didn't even mention Zach Henning, who's in that same boat.
Exactly.
You have, but it's the point of what we're bringing all these names is to say, when you look back in the spring, that situation almost gives the coaching staff PTSD to say, look, we're going to get so many bodies in here that we have enough answers regardless of what happens.
Right.
And also it avoids, again, doesn't prevent a transfer portal taking December, next spring or whatever, but it doesn't mandate, okay, we need to go and get 2 starters in the portal no matter what, because as we saw, you cannot predict what's going to come in the portal. You can think, you can have an idea, and then the portal actually brings into reality, which is not necessarily aligning with what Washington thought, which is fair because, again, you can only know, as Jedd said multiple times, you can only recruit who's in the portal.
No, Lars, I really like all the points you made there. There's so much to think about, and it's really exciting because there's still spots open in this 25 class. We talked about some of the guys who might take, one or two of those spots yesterday. You hinted at maybe the coaching staff is going to look into some flips. I'm sure that's something that they're not the only ones. Every coaching staff in the country is certainly going to be doing that all the way up until signing day. But before we get to signing day, there's a season in front of us, and we're going to get into our biggest breakout stars on both sides of the ball. Lars, we got a fantastic question from one of our everydayers saying, I'd love to hear, after 1 week of fall camp, which is kind of what we wanted the majority of the theme of the show to be, who you guys are going to plant your flags on. And it doesn't matter. There are no restrictions on this one. So we're putting Denzel Boston back in the boat. We're putting Jeremiah Hunter back in the boat. All these guys who, maybe we've put off for one reason or another because we wanted to have some different discussions with some different exercises. One guy on both sides of the ball. We're each picking one for this segment. Let's start on offense. Who are you going with?
I'm glad you mentioned him. Give me Jeremiah Hunter. I think
that's how I was going to take.
So
no, take it. Go.
Because the one thing that was interesting was when you look at his body of work, he's a guy 6'3", 262, 64, whatever you want to list him at. Big target body. But then you go look at the Blitnikoff list, and I mentioned this to you before the show. And Jeremiah Hunter's not on there. And I'm like, he's going to be on there at some point this season, one way or another. And I think when you have a good quarterback and a really good quarterback in Will Rogers' case, once they get that relationship down even more, and you can kind of see how intense Will has been about getting that communication down this summer, I think Will's on a mission this year to say, you know what, I could have 2,000-yard receivers. Denzel on one side and Jeremiah on the other. And it would not surprise me that much. Now, it's going to surprise a lot of people in college football that hear that. It's like, wait, Denzel, he's a 3-star Pembroke Ridge, and Jeremiah hasn't had more than 800 yards at Cal. It's like, he hasn't had a quarterback at Cal. This is not his fault. That's the point. And you're coming in with an air raid quarterback who's not going to run an air raid system, but has experience getting the ball to many different guys and many different types of receivers. Yeah, we're going to figure that one out pretty quickly.
So I'm so glad you mentioned the quarterback thing, because that's why I wanted to pick Jeremiah Hunter. I'm going to leave it for you. That's because you hit the nail on the head, where that was why I wanted to say he's going to be the biggest breakout star, where I'm not going with Denzel Boston here. And I'll get to that in a second. But one of the things that I loved about Jeremiah is just his body control and some of the catches that he's made, how strong he's been over the middle with just as we've seen throughout the first week of fall camp. And he's somebody where, Denzel is going to make tons of big plays, but I feel, on some of those slant routes when Will needs to convert on 3rd and 6, 3rd and 7, that Jeremiah is going to be the first read because of his strength and because of his ability to go over the middle and dish out hits, not just take them. And like I said, I'm not going with Denzel Boston here, where we have certainly anointed Denzel as, the prince who's promised sort of thing at this point. So I wanted to go with somebody different, where I'm glad we got a shout out in there for him. But one guy who I think could end up being, at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, and this roster is completely gone in 3, 4, 5 years from now, I'm going with one of the few guys who I think is going to be taken higher in the NFL draft than Denzel Boston. You know where I'm going with this? You think you know where I'm going with this? I'm going with Drew Azzopardi. I have been so impressed with watching Drew, where, when we look at guys in the transfer portal that are coming from a lower level, we literally just had this discussion with Sebastian Valdez, where it's, all right, is that guy going to be ready to play against a higher level of competition? With Drew Azzopardi, the answer as soon as he stepped on campus was yes. Yes, he can. And you look at him, he's got the prototypical size. He's 6'7", 310, 315, whatever he's listed at now. And just every day when we watch him, we've seen, protections break down at every single point in the line. He's certainly gotten beat once or twice. But when you look at basically every single play, the guy who is the most rock solid along the offensive line is Drew Azzopardi at right tackle, play in and play out. This is a guy who's going to maul some people in the run game this year. And this is a guy who, no matter who is lined up across from him in pass protection, he's got the strength, he's got the mobility, he's got the athleticism to stand his ground. And he's going to see some very, talented edge rushers in the Big Ten this year. The one guy who I'm really looking at more than anybody else is when Washington goes to the whiteout at Penn State on November 9th, when he gets to match up with Abdul Carter. Lars, that is circled on my calendar as, whether we both get to be there, we're in the stadium, whether we're watching on TV, no matter what we're doing, that is going to be the number one matchup that I am focused on for that game. No matter what the schedule looks like, no matter what the roster looks like at that point in time, it's what is Drew Azzopardi going to look like against Abdul Carter, because that's going to be a key there. And I just can't wait to watch those guys play.
No, that's going to be one of the top matchups in the Big Ten in terms of when you get an individual game match. I thought you might say Mason Graham in that same respect when Michigan comes to Washington.
Yeah, that's going to be more of an interior thing.
Right. No, but to your point, though, I can imagine Drew drawing some of the better interior guys that can play outside, because Mason Graham is not a guy who can't play more than one position. So I could see a lot of teams try and test Azzopardi, especially sure. And then as they start to realize he's not the guy to test, figure out whoever wins that job at left tackle and just let them sort that one out, which will be that's Washington's problem to have. But I'm glad you mentioned Drew, because he's a guy that he just looks so violent too. And I think that's exactly what you need for a Big Ten offensive lineman. I remember asking him after practice where I was like, hey, I know a couple of days ago there was that, moment between Anthony Ward and Jonah Coleman, and you were the first guy that showed up. And he's like, oh yeah, no, I don't care who it is. Like, we're coming to defend these guys. And I'm like, right. All right, good. Like, and you can clearly tell that it matters to these guys. It's not just I'm coming here to do a job. And in the case of Drew, I'm glad you mentioned him. It's a 2-year guy at least. So you have him, and even if he balls out this year, I would be really surprised, given that he didn't start even a full season last year, that he would go this year. I would imagine he at least stays until 25, gets 2 full seasons in the Big Ten, and then says, you know what, now I'll be a day 2 pick, or maybe play myself into a day 1 pick. Who knows? But I'm glad you mentioned him. So we should probably flip to the defensive side. I'm assuming here for this next one. And I mean, my God, just give me Ephesians Prysock. I know who you could talk about Carson Bruener. We could talk about so many other guys.
Thank you.
But everything, in my opinion, if it doesn't start with Carson and Sebastian and Zach, everything is about Ephesians Prysock. Because when you can have that Richard Sherman level quarterback that just takes away half the field, what it allows you to do with both your nickel and your second quarterback is immensely different. And I think that when you look at who Washington has at both those positions, whether you talk about that Elijah, both of them together, Dyson McCutcheon, Jordan Shaw, all of these guys get better with a 6'3", 6'4" lockdown quarterback who, man, I just looking at his body, I could almost see him playing receiver and dominating just as much with the ability to read the ball. And that's what makes him such a good quarterback, I think, is when you look at it. John Richardson, he likes his guys to be very aggressive. And I think Ephesians Prysock is the one where you can stand on all 10 toes and say, yeah, I have no problem doing that. I'll take that challenge. And we'll figure out, lining up against no matter who it is in the Big Ten. I think Ephesians is going to get everyone's best shot, similar to how Drew Azzopardi is going to get everyone's best shot.
I like that a lot. So I was really torn here, but because we talked so much about Sebastian Valdez earlier, and I would say that he's been the most impressive defender. I want to make sure that I get this out there now. I think he's been the most impressive defender so far during fall camp. And that said, we haven't seen Zach Durfee do any team stuff just yet. So I kind of took him out of this conversation. We've seen Cameron Fabiculanen kind of rehabbing a minor knee thing, as we were told. So that's another one where, we haven't seen a lot of him just yet. And those would be great guys to pick. But I can't pass up on talking about Carson Bruener, where Carson Bruener is going to be the best linebacker on this team. He's going to lead this team in tackles. And Lars, I think he could lead the Big Ten in tackles. I really do. Where he's got the speed, he's got the IQ, he's got the athleticism, he's got the strength. He has everything you need. And when you look at just some of the numbers from last year, if let's just say Carson is starting instead of Alfonso Tupatala, do you think that anybody would be surprised if he's the team leader in tackles that year? I certainly wouldn't be. Yeah. And that's kind of the thing, is he's just a tackling machine. He's always around the ball. He always finds a way to make a play and make an impact. And that's one of the fun things about Carson is you look at all those things and you just say, yeah, this is a guy who's going to be an NFL player. He's going to be somebody who, no matter where he goes at the next level, is going to start from day one. And we're going to see that week in and week out this fall on a couple of different levels, because not only, I just talked about some of his attributes, but he's also going to be calling the plays for Steve Belichick and for this defense, where he's the primary guy who's wearing the headset. Steve has said that he's gotten some other guys wearing it just to, throw some different looks in case somebody's not on the field. But Carson is going to be that guy. And with this scheme, which is going to be a very NFL-friendly scheme, that once he gets that next level, it's going to translate for him really quickly. We've seen him pick it up really fast. We saw him almost have an interception the other day. And just the more I watch Carson, the more I just say, yeah, this guy is, when we look at just some of the linebackers that Washington has brought in the 2025 class, they were looking for guys who were built for the Big Ten. And Carson Bruener is a guy that was built for the Big Ten.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's bigger, stronger, faster, no disrespect intended version of BBK. Back in the day, where a sideline guy, where if Ben Burker would have had 2 or 3 more inches of height, like Carson has, all the picks and PBUs and impact that he had at Washington, and you put him in Carson's frame, oh my God, he would have ate so. He would have been a day 2 pick instead of a day 3 pick, because I think he was a 4th round pick, if I'm not mistaken. He was in that round, 4th, 5th round. Carson is a day, top 50 pick at worst, in terms of when you just look at his frame and the fact that he's got such a high football mind. I think when you look at what a middle linebacker in the NFL has to do, the amount of things that Carson can do, the perfect marriage. And so this is almost like an audition for Carson to the NFL this season, playing in an NFL scheme with an NFL defensive coordinator and a really one of the better linebacker coaches in the country, Robert Ball.
Absolutely. Now, Lars, with that being said, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. And just a reminder that thank you for making Locked On Huskies your first listen of the day. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast, from NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors. Our good friend Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron. You can find the link to Locked On College Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And with that being said, also make sure you check out the Locked On Huskies Insider Program, where we've got so much more fun stuff over there. We just uploaded 30 interviews from fall camp, from UW football's media day, that you can go check out. It's over 2 hours of audio if you're curious and learn some more about some of these players, get a little bit more insight into what it is that we do behind the scenes. We think that's a little fun boost for you. We're even doing an exclusive Locked On Huskies Insiders Q&A next week at some point, where you're only going to be able to ask questions and get the link to that. If you are a Locked On Huskies Insider, the link to that is down in the description below. You get a 2-week free trial, and after that, it's $4.99 a month. And we're doing so many fun things over there to make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck with that subscription. And with that being said, make sure you subscribe to Locked On Huskies wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating the channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Friday.